The beginning of part 1, our author over here tells us how important of a tool is interview, or what are the different ways interview has been looked at. It is the book that he wrote that got him the intellectual superstardom, which is the name of the rose. Okay, that sold 10 million copies in the year 1980. Interstices is the empty space. A lot of time that we waste, our Umberto over here makes use of them. That's the secret behind his success. Hello and a very warm welcome to your prep school English classes. I'm your English teacher, Kshama. In this session today, I'm about to take an interview. Yes, it is the lesson interview from your textbook Flamingo. It has part 1 and part 2. What is there in part 1? We get to know about what is interview in general, what does it do, and how do people, most famous celebrities with regard to literature, be it the novelists, how do they feel about being interviewed? The second part, we are going to analyze an interview and see if the interviewer is, asking appropriate questions, if the interviewee is comfortable answering those questions, and how does he ace the interview, okay? Without wasting any time, let's see what's there in this session today for us, okay? So we're going to talk about the author, the background, as well as summarize the whole lesson. Then we will recap it, okay? Before beginning anything, as always, I have a couple of questions for you. Do you prefer being interviewed or interviewing someone? What is more comfortable? What is more suitable to you and your personality? Next up, if you are taking an interview and if you get to know that the person giving you the interview is not comfortable anymore, if you know that the person is uncomfortable, would you continue to throw questions at them? Okay. Last part is, if you are that interviewee, if you are the one who is giving interviews and you don't know how to go through this survive through this awkward interview, how would you escape or how would you survive throughout the interview session? If they're asking you personal questions, if they're asking you questions that are making you totally uncomfortable, out of the line, how would you survive it? Think about it. Meanwhile, let's start talking about our author for today, who is Christopher Sylvester. He was born in 1959 and he was educated at Lancing College, Sussex. He was a student of history in Peterhouse, Cambridge. Then from 1983 to 1994, he worked for Private Eye, and the column that he wrote was New Boys. Okay, and he's also the editor of this particular chapter is taken from this work of his. He was the editor of Penguin Book of Interviews. Okay, an anthology of from 1859 to the present day, and the author of the Pimlico Companion to Parliament. Now, this particular anthology that we are talking about, Penguin Book of Interviews, is where our today's chapter is taken from. Note that. And he is also the author of Pimlico Companion to Parliament. Now that we have got to know all of this, let's not waste any time and jump right in to understand what is interview part 1 and 2. Now, in part 1, the beginning of part 1, our author over here tells us how important of a tool is interview, or what are the different ways interview has been looked at. Okay. So initially, over like the 130 years, he gives us a rough count. Ever since interview has been discovered as a mode of communication, it has been used relentlessly. It has been a commonplace in case of journalism. Whatever that we know about each other. For example, if I were to find out some information about y'all, what I have to do, I'll have to ask questions. If I were to give some information to you as well, I'll have to call up for an interview, I'll have to give information if I was a celebrity. That's the case. So whatever we know of each other, it is because one person asks questions and the other person answers. That is how much cliche, that is how much of a commonplace tool of interview is in case of journalism. Now, but since it differs, the way interview carries out, question and answer carries out, it is outdoor, indoor, the way it happens is all different. And hence, the functions, methods, and the merits and demerits also might vary. Some might think, they also claim that it is the highest form of retrieving information, that it is the source of truth, and it is also artistic. Interview is artistic. While one side of the society or one side of people who are involved in journalism or interview might claim this, the other part, which mostly are the ones who are being interviewed, or interviewee as we call it, they have some other things to say. What is that? We'll get to know soon, okay? So now, them we can call them as victims. They are the ones who are the victims, because to ask questions is an easy job. If you say all you have to do is frame appropriate questions, sometimes these are inappropriate too, and you feel like once when you have the authority to ask questions, you can ask whatever you want. But when you are victim, when you have to answer certain question, it takes a lot of your effort. It is a matter of responsibility. You might not want to overshare, you might not want to talk about something, you might want to tell about something, yet there is no question that you would answer and give out all those information, right? So you don't know where the line is, and it is all blurred out. In that case, the victims have to say it is an unwarranted, without our consent, without intimating us anything. It is like an intrusion into our personal space. Sometimes interviews end up doing that, right? We have also seen a lot of awkward interviews which end up being not at all fruitful in any way possible, okay? Now, Dennis Bryan is the one that I quote here. He says almost everything that we know about this particular moment, or everything in the moment, reaches us from one person asking question to the other, through one man asking questions to the other. However, there are so many backdrops with regard to the interviewee's side. But if you come to the interviewer side, or those who are, they're almost all the illiterate people would have read an interview at some point in their life. And if you come to the celebrities part, in some point in their life, they would have given an interview, of course. Now that interview is such an important part of the communication system on the whole, let's analyze it. What do the victims have to say about it? Let's see it one by one, okay? All these people that you see over here are amazing writers and novelists. V.S. Naipaul is known for, I think I have read House of Mr. Biswas and short stories like The Vice Principal. And he says the process of interview made him get wounded. He felt like he lost a part of himself. Okay, it's, according to him, it's more like one of those primitive people feeling, if you take a picture of them, they felt like the soul was taken away from them. Similarly, if I were to be subjected to an interview, I feel wounded and I feel like I've lost a part of myself. Meaning that he might have felt interview is too much intruding, that it takes a whole part of myself, and I feel lifeless or soulless after that, is what V.S. Naipaul says. Lewis Carroll, who you definitely know through Alice in Wonderland, he is the creator of Alice in Wonderland. He feels that it is horror, and he never consented to be interviewed. Later on in his life, through success, he actually, silenced all the people who used to bug him to get autographs, to get interviews and everything, and he would just say all those stories with amusement. But he never consented to be interviewed, and for him, it was horror. Okay, that's Lewis Carroll, who is the author of Alice in Wonderland. And third, we have Rudyard Kipling. This is also a very well-known name in the field of English literature. He has written some of the famous poems like If, and he has also written your Jungle Book. Rudyard Kipling has written your Jungle Book. He says it is a crime and it is not respectable at all. And there is an account that has been given to us where his wife, Carolyn, in her diary has mentioned how one of their entire day was completely ruined by two of the interviewers from Boston. And what did her husband, or Rudyard Kipling, reply to that? He said that whoever is a respectable person would not ask for an interview, forget about even giving an interview, would not even ask for it. It is equivalent to a crime. It is not, it is definitely not respectable at all. But a person who said all of this, a person who thought it was illegal, it was criminal, it was nasty to take interview, to ask questions and everything, he actually ended up committing this crime, if we can call that, or he actually ended up interviewing Mark Twain later on in his life. So is it that you are okay interviewing another person and not giving interview? Is that how it is? That's quite an hypocrisy, right? You are okay with one side of it and the other side you're not okay with it. But then we also have H.G. Wells, who is known for most of his science fiction works such as The Invisible Man. He actually says interviewing is an ordeal. It's like a very unpleasant, prolonged, horrible experience. And the person who said that 40 years later decided to have that unpleasant ordeal. He actually most of the times was completely consented to be interviewed. But then he actually ended up interviewing Joseph Stalin 40 years later. So it shows that these great writers and authors and everybody, all the celebrities, were okay interviewing others and were not okay getting interviewed by other people. They were not okay being the interviewees. Next up, Saul Bellow, who was also one of the famous writer celebrities, but then he was also frequently interviewed. However, although he consented to be interviewed multiple times, He felt that it is thumbprints on your wings sometimes. Sometimes you don't want to answer. Sometimes the question is so up your neck that you know that you're in the public eye. You know people are expecting an answer for this one. It builds up such a pressure that you have to answer. It feels like it is a deliberate obligation, and that's what he means over here. So it is true that there are a lot of drawbacks that exist with regard to interviewing and the process that goes along with it. However, one cannot deny that it has proved itself to be a most serviceable, to be most useful medium if utilized properly. Then, so vivid impressions of the contemporaries that we have, or all the information that we have here, we have again Dennis Brian telling us that all of this we get, whatever the impression that we have of the celebrities that we aren't able to approach, aren't able to get direct access to. We go through a lot of YouTube videos, you go through a lot of television interviews. That is where we know them from. Whatever the impression that you have, be it negative impression, be it positive impression, all of that comes from what? Comes from the interview that they have given and that we have perceived or looked at in a certain perspective, right? Now, everything we know has come from what? One person asking question from the other, which means that the person taking the interview, or the interviewer as we call it, is in the position of utmost power and influence, is it not? Let us take an example in part 2 of one such interview and understand whether our celebrity over here, our celebrity writer over here, Umberto Eco, is he comfortable giving the interview that he's giving? Does he like giving interviews? Or whenever he's asked questions that are a little personal, a little, maybe crossing the line, how does he handle it? Does he snub himself and try not to answer it? How is the interviewer asking questions? Is he direct about things? Is he on point? Let's analyze all of this, okay? So, we have the interviewer who is Mukund Padmanabhan from The Hindu, okay? And the interviewee over here is, I love the pronunciation of his name, it's Umberto Eco. He is from Italy, okay? And he's a professor at the University of Bologna, Italy. And his reputation is actually, he is more into the academic work since he is the professor. Ideas on semiotics, literary interpretation, medieval aesthetics, these are some of the serious academic works that he actually should have had reputation for. Instance, then he actually turned into fiction writing, literary fiction, academic texts, essays, children books, and newspaper articles. He actually eventually turned into this. Okay, but what has given him the superstardom? Is it the fact that he has written all these papers on semiotics, which is like the symbol interpretation and study, or is it the medieval aesthetics that he wrote that got him the superstardom? No, it is the book that he wrote that got him the intellectual superstardom, which is The Name of the Rose. Okay, that sold 10 million copies in the year 1980. 10 whole millions of copies of this particular book. That actually gave him the superstardom of being the intellectual and not exactly his academic papers and everything. Let's see what does he have to say about all of this, okay? Moving forward, let's start with whatever question that Mukund Padmanabhan has asked and how Umberto has answered it, okay? So first up, Mukund Padmanabhan starts by quoting David Lodge, and he says, I can't understand how one man can do all the things at a time. That's the quote that he takes from David Lodge, Padmanabhan, and he asks it in reference to who? Umberto. He asks, exactly covertly asking, how are you able to do so many things at a time? Okay. To which our Umberto asks, I think I only give the impression of doing multiple things at a time, but at the end of the day, I am doing the same things I feel like. Okay, that's what he says, but always doing the same thing. He says, how is that possible? Mukund asks, how is that again? To which Umberto says, see, I do the same work or the different kinds of works, but the intent that I have, but the agenda with which I do the work is the philosophical interest behind this. That remains the same. Okay, and he also gives us an example to make us understand it. Now, whatever the academic work, say for instance, the children's book that I am writing, academic book that I am writing, or the children's book, let's take that example. I have the ideas of non-violence and peace that I am portraying through this work. Although I might be, seeming like doing a lot of stuff, the agenda that I have behind it is to satisfy my philosophical interest, which is I have done my job over here, non-violence and peace. Okay, so my work is done. Though I might be seeming like doing multiple things, The one path that I am taking is the philosophical interests, and it seems to you that I am doing a lot of things, but it is at the end of the day only one thing, he says. Then of course, he also tells us the secret behind this. What is the secret behind doing multiple things or seeming like doing multiple things, yet him involving in one interest, such as what is the secret behind this? He says elimination of empty spaces is the secret behind this. Then he explains it to us. He calls this elimination of empty spaces that are there in the universe as interstices. If only you eliminate all the empty spaces that are there in the universe, he says the universe will be as small as your fist. And then he explains it to us. Imagine that I have to reach a certain floor because somebody is waiting for me there. And while I reach the floor, while I'm in the lift, I have a lot of time that I'm wasting. Meanwhile, in that lift, or if I am the person who is waiting for you to come up and reach me over here in my apartment for a tea or a coffee, I will write an article in that time. So he uses the interstices. He works in that empty space. And that is how he is able to do multiple things at a time. Understood? I hope that is clear. It is called as interstices. Interstices is the empty space. A lot of time that we waste, our Umberto over here makes use of them. That's the secret behind his success. Then I work in my empty spaces, he reveals. Later on, our Mukund Padmanabhan asks another doubt. He says, in your non-fictional and scholarly work, one would assume your style of writing is very different. It is very playful and personal. Usually what happens in the non-fictional and academic, serious study papers, and how will the tone of it, how will the style of it be? It's unlike the regular academic style. Usually it is very depersonalized, very dry, very boring. You would not want to read an academic paper for a very long period of time. You would want to, unless you have interest, but not for a very long period of time because it's very depersonalized. It is hard to connect with it like how you easily connect with any story or any fictional, work. But how is it that in case of Umberto, Mukund asks, you write in a very playful, you write in a very personalized manner. Is it a conscious effort? Or is it like very unconscious, comes very naturally to you? He asks, is it conscious or very natural? Now, so far, I'd want you to think about, is Umberto, comfortable answering all these questions? Has there been any, uncomfortable scenario in the interview so far? And you could also agree to me when I say that or disagree. Mukund over here is sticking to the point. He has so far stuck to the questions that are related to the academic work, professional world, and how things around it work, and not to any of the personal areas of Umberto's life, okay? Which is what a professional interviewer should do. Next up, we'll see what else do they talk about. Then Umberto gives us an answer whether it is natural or whether it is a conscious effort that he writes his academic, all the serious papers in a personalized, in a very playful manner. To which he gives us a story. In his first doctoral dissertation, when he was explaining his paper and everything, one of the professors pointed it out that all the scholars they learn a lot about the subject and they make a lot of hypotheses. Then they go on correcting themselves. Okay, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this doesn't work. At the end, okay, this is what has worked out. That's what happens in the paper presentation. A lot of this thing was done, but then I had kept a couple of hypotheses. All of this has been wrong. One proved out to be right. That's what happens. So a certain subject, they study a lot and keep a lot of false hypotheses, correct it at the end and put one conclusion. That is how usually dissertation papers are. Generalizing that, one professor says so. But what was different in case of Umberto? The story of the research. He actually went on to narrate how his research was, what are the errors that he did, what are the trials that he did, whatever that went into his research, he gave in all the details of the research in his doctoral dissertation. That's why he stood out from the rest of the people. Hence, his paper was published by this professor, which was also another way of appreciating his narrative approach to presenting the academic paper. Okay. Then, now, that was at the age of 22, he realized that his narrative style that is there, that is one of the successful aspect or approach to delivering the academic paper. He understood that. But when did he actually implement it? He implemented it at the age of 50, when he started actually writing narratives, novels and everything. Till then, he was actually not writing any novels and stuff. Okay, but at the age of 22, he had though realized that it is through the narrative approach I'll have to deliver the academic work. That will be the success of it. Then he also tells us how there was a friend of his called as Ronald Barthes. Now, Ronald Barthes was always frustrated, always irritated, because he always wanted to, deliver narratives. He always wanted to write novels. But instead, he always wrote essays, and that made him frustrated. He always wanted to do something that Umberto was very natural with, okay? So, he was frustrated essayist, but he could never become the novelist or the narrative writer that he always wanted to be, because he died. Umberto considers himself lucky that I did not suffer from that. I got this natural narrative approach to my work, and that has helped me become a novelist that I am as well. Okay. Now at the end, let's understand, we're almost moving to the end of the interview. Okay. Now there's a question. Although Umberto Eco has published and worked towards all the semiotics works, academic papers and everything, more than 40 of his works, non-fictional works, are there. And it is all significant, not some trivial work. It's all significant. Although after doing all of that, he's still known as a novelist. Okay. So the journalist asks, or Mukund Padmanabhan, who is the interviewer, he asks, does that bother you? You having written so many works, he actually makes a little mistake over there. He's about to say, how many 20 have you written? And, our Umberto Eco does not take a chance. He actually straight away corrects him, adds and says, it's 40. It's over 40 academic works, non-fictional works that I have written. He does not hesitate from correcting the interviewer of not getting the facts right there. Okay. Then he asks, does that bother you? To which our Umberto Eco actually answers and says, see, I am a university professor who participates in a lot of academic conferences, and I am not a full-time novelist who actually attends meetings on pen clubs and writers. I am a hobby-based person who writes novels. I take writing novels as a hobby, and I do it only on Sundays. So to be recognized as something that I am only on Sundays, only on selective time, it does bother him. He says he agrees to that. But he also adds on, he can't expect larger audience to read something of this sort, something of a very serious sort. For example, the semiotics paper that we can take about. He cannot expect all of them or the larger mass to be able to do so. So it's okay if they have accepted this one, I don't have a problem with it. He says, adds on to his first answer. Then later on, our Mukund Padmanabhan asks that the Name of the Rose, 1980s work that sold 10 million copies, he, talking about it, says it is a serious detective yarn. It is also a combination of metaphysics, theology, medieval history and everything. Everything is combined in Name of the Rose. Now, how did you think, what is the reason behind its success when it was a combination of all these things? There was, metaphysics, there was theology, there was medieval history. All the serious things were also there. Then how do you think it became such a huge, massive success? Okay. To which, are you puzzled by the success? Have you been able to figure out or decode what was the reason behind such a huge success? To which, without any hindrance, our Umberto Eco tells us that no, actually the journalists and sometimes the publishers are the ones who are puzzled. I'll tell you why. Because most of these people, journalists and publishers, they think that people like reading crap or trash most of the times. They appreciate that only. It's not true. There are a large, mass of people. If the world is filled with around 8 billion people and people who have read my book around are like 10 million people, there are still many people that I did not reach to. However, these people, 10 million people who have read it, these are open. These can risk themselves to read, something like this, to difficult reading experiences. They don't like trash all the time. It is the journalists and the publishers most of the times who think people appreciate trash all the time. No, it's not true. People can be open to reading difficult reading experiences and complicated stuff like metaphysics and theology as well. So it is these people who are puzzled because they are not being able to retrieve or understand what is the, reason behind the success of this particular book. So without any hesitation, he gives it away. Although he's interacting with one of the journalists himself, he did not think about the fact that, oh boy, this journalist might get offended. No, nothing as such. He's open and he talks freely. That's some things that you can analyze. Then, so Mukund also asks, so the success of the novel, do you think it is because you have written about the medieval history? Is that so? Umberto Eco says, maybe it can be true, but however, there have been many people who have written on the medieval history before me. Now, what is that? There could be something that is different that has appealed the people. And he also tells us an instance of how his American publisher loved the book. Great book. It is wonderful. But she says, this will not be sold over more than 3,000 copies. I don't think that is possible, my friend, she says. And he was only given the advance of 3,000 copies. But in the United States alone, in a country, she says, in a country with, the publisher says, in a country with no cathedral or no Latin study, I don't think this book will work out. But then at the end, he managed to sell 2 to 3 million copies in the United States alone. Okay, so you can't really predict what was the mysterious, that one little variable that triggered the success of this particular book. There have been people who have written multiple books on the medieval history, but why only Umberto's book blew up and not any other book? Then a lot of books on the same theme already. 10 years earlier or 10 years later, he also adds on, now you need to analyze Umberto, as proud as he is of his work, he's not boasting around. He also adds on, as you can see, you get to know a lot of stuff through a lot of hidden or between the lines stuff also about these celebrities. As much as he's proud of being an academic, professor, a novelist and everything, he's also very grounded. He says, probably if I would have written it 10 years earlier or 10 years later, I doubt if this would have worked out the same way or not. Okay, even when he asks, how do you feel? People only see you as novelist and not as an academic. It does bother him, but he says, if they have accepted it that way, I'm okay with it. So it tells us that he is also grounded. Okay, so it wouldn't have been the same if it was written 10 years later or 10 years earlier. So that's what we got to know about actual interview that happened at the second part of it. So in the first part, we understood what sort of a process is interview, and we got to know about the interviewees, or the one who we can call as the victims. We had Rudyard Kipling, we had Lewis Carroll, we had H.G. Wells, all of these people who felt like interviewing is an ordeal, interviewing is a crime, all of that, right? V.S. Naipaul, who felt like interviewing, okay, I cannot consent to it, it is not happening, okay? All of these people felt various things about or aspects about interview that they were not comfortable with. However, in the later part of their life, they were the ones who were seen to be interviewing other people. That also happened. So is it that one way you're okay, the other way around you're not okay? That's what we saw. We saw the interaction or the interview between Umberto Eco and the journalist Mukund Padmanabhan. And he tells us that he's a professor first and who writes novels on Sundays. And then the interview begins. We get to know a lot of new concepts, such as how he does multiple things with the same interest that he's, quenching, which is the philosophical interest. And then we also get to know about working in the empty spaces, interstices. That's something that might be useful for all of us. See, interviews also give us a lot of lessons. Then we get to know about whether he's natural about something, whether it is the conscious effort to be able to write academic papers in a playful manner. We also get to know about that. Started off with novels and satisfied his taste for narration. How did he do that? And how does he feel about only being known as a novelist and totally not as a non-fictional academic or a paper writing professor? And then the victory of his 10 million selling novel, The Name of the Rose. What is the mystery behind it? What is that one thing that just clicked? We try to analyze it, but it still remains as a mystery. Now that was one very, part one was very organized. Part two was very, very, very organized. And it had a lot of takeaways for us. And it had a lot of perspectives for us to analyze it from, both from the perspective of interviewer and from the perspective of interviewee. And mostly from the perspective of interviewee. However, in the next part, we also got to know what sort of questioning happens and how do they answer it and what do we as audience take away from it. There was so much more. If you are able to extract more from it, when I meet you in the live session, you'll be open to tell me all of that. On that note, I'll see you all in the next classes that come up. Until then, take care. Thank you.